Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a collection of hundreds of monster ecology and strategy videos on my channel. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing as I upload at least twice a week. Sahuagin were originally created by Steve Marsh and have been with us since before the game was even published. Actually, this deserves some explanation because we really owe quite a lot to Steve. After getting his hands on the original D&D rules, Steve sent his own vision of an elemental plane of water to Gary Gygax, who incorporated a number of the underwater creatures and magic items into Dave Arneson's Blackmore supplement published in 1975, which added a lot of the swamp and oceanic content to that supplement. Marsh's material introduced the Sahuagin, the Itjitjatjitl, and the aquatic elves. Steve also came up with the concept of the mystic, and while we're at it, the concept of the Magic the Gathering planeswalkers that could teleport to various planes of existence via mental powers. A lot of the mental abilities of the mystic concept were altered and then published in the Eldritch Wizardry supplement the following year as the first psionic powers for D&D. Steve Marsh has never been paid for his original creative contributions, but they certainly had a big impact on the game and continue to do so to this day. Originally, the Sahuagin were simply known as the Devil Men of the Deep when they appeared in Dave Arneson's 1974 Blackmore supplement. They went on to evolve into the Sea Devils, appearing in the first edition monster manual described as dwelling in warm, saltwater depths, predatory in the extreme, known to kill for sport and pleasure as well as food. Saltmarsh Reboot is based on a trio of the original adventures, The Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, The Danger at Dunwater, and The Final Enemy, along with another 4 adventures which are crammed into that action-packed tome, all published between 1982 and 1983 originally. This was an actual underwater campaign for Dungeons & Dragons by design. Later on they reappeared as Sharkkin, and a version was included, I think, as a playable race in the campaign setting supplement called The Sea People's Book in 1990. I've just been reading through that and I don't think that's correct. I think they appeared as a playable character race later on. Although it is set in the Sea of Dread, it is, and very dated, it includes information on sea elves, tritons, and merfolk, as well as other races, aquatic creatures, magic items, and underwater spellcasting. And I'll be referring to that tome quite a lot in the later part of this video. They appeared as the Sahuagin in the Monstrous Compendium in 1989, and really got a huge expansion on their lore between 1997 and 98, with the 2 Dragon magazine articles and a book called The Sea Devils. Dragon number 250 represents the Sahuagin as a player character race. There you go. And since then they have made an appearance in every core monster manual for every edition and get a listing in the monster manual for 5th edition, plus a mention in Volo's guide where he talks about the Triton race and of course the Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Lots of material to dig into, quite an important aquatic species, and this is a fairly comprehensive video, so let's get deeply nerdy, shall we? Settle back, grab yourself a beverage, I've got one. If you've not already watched my video on the aquatic races of Faerun, that is a good primer on them and helps as a sort of a glossary, because the Sahuagin, also known as the Sahuagin, they have a heavy impact on all aquatic creatures and are in conflict with just about all of them in one way or another. They dwell in the deep ocean environments that many other races find to be stark and inhospitable, but like the Underdark, the oceans of Toril are abundant with life even in the darkest, coldest depths, because they are portals. They have portals to the elemental planes of water. There are ancient edifices built by storm giants. There are lairs of powerful beings, great horrors such as Dagon and the formidable Krakens. Unlike Earth's oceans, the marine life is even more diverse, with a greater range of species which never became extinct, and quite a lot of them compete for the same ecological niches. So much like the land, the oceans and lakes, streams and rivers of these high fantasy worlds may have the same temperatures, may have the same terrain and weather, but can have quite different ecological mixes from one area to another, simply because different species are more dominant in that territory, while similar species might have staked their own claim nearby. Your character, well versed in the ecology of their own world, would understand this. They would know how important local knowledge is. One cannot just predict what's going on in the map based solely on climate and terrain. It's not Earth. It is familiar to them, but quite alien to your eye. Fishermen on the Sword Coast would know things about the local marine conditions that only first-hand experience could teach, and will share secrets of the waves with each other over taproom ales and slow games of chance in the early hours, trading information like it was as good as gold. We know that the Sea of Fallen Stars, known to the aquatic folk as Seros, has its own share of deep zones and populations of Sahuagin, but the seas surrounding the continent of Faerun, known as the Serosions as the Outer Seas, are ancient and absolutely full of adventure. Picture giant kelp, foot thick, hundreds of feet long, grown and woven together to trap mystical bubbles of air, in which the shell and coral cities of aquatic races sit. High above undersea mountains, there are havens for all sorts of marine life, and just as many tombs, catacombs, dungeons and assorted ruins as the land sites. In the water, the elevation below the surface determines a lot of what sort of creatures dwell there, and the outside of the mountain ranges and submerged mountain chains, there are great rocks and reefs. There are large stretches of undulating ocean floor, like a silt and sand desert covered with all sorts of deep ocean scavengers and filtered features, from the tiny to the gigantic. And in these sparsely inhabited zones there are deep ocean trenches, quite often fuming with their own climate of deep volcanic vents and home to unique ecosystems, isolated for thousands and thousands of years. The most dangerous living creatures on the face of Twarrell dwell in these chasms and deeper, some of which extend for great distances and plunge miles below the ocean floor. Here we find the watchful fortresses of the noble tritons, the enchanted laboratories and secure vaults of storm giants, and the lairs of ancient dragons, and the homelands of the Sahuagin. I have to say personally that these are one of the creatures I would really not like to be on the same world with. It's only thanks to the lizard folk and the nations of the sea elves and merfolk and tritons and other good and noble aquatic races we rarely hear about that the land is not constantly ravaged by these deep ocean killers. The Sahuagin they're such a threat to other races. We can also thank many of the evil species of the land and water for keeping them in check as well, such as the Morphquoth, the Coalinth and the Mero. Most other races of a more neutral philosophy tend to just steer well clear of the Sahuagin and will just leave when they show up. The devil rays called the Ixijachitl frequently clash with the Sahuagin, but they tend to dwell in shallower waters, and it's only been in the last 110 years that the Ixijachitl have become aggressively invasive outside of their warmer, shallower, watery vampiric imperiums. This increased tension has stirred up the Sahuagin even more and has only served to increase the more martial leadership in their society. But what are these Sahuagin? Where do they come from? How do they live, and what motivates them to be so relentlessly nasty? In a nutshell, the Sahuagin are fish-like, monstrous humanoid species that live in oceans, seas, underground lakes and underwater caves. They tend not to like fresh water though. The Sahuagin speak their own native tongue. With a higher intelligence score, they can also speak 2 bonuses languages, and are lawful evil and have a much more regimented and advanced society than one would suspect. If I was going to be clickbaity, I would have called this video The Secrets of the Sahuagin, because there's a lot here that you don't know about, as the typical encounter with them would give the strong impression that this is a savage and feral species. It's their predatory nature and demonically enhanced bloodlust that causes this murderous reaction to other races. Among their own kind, their culture is more akin to the tyrannical hierarchical structure of the 9 hells, divided between the absolute rule of the high priestesses and the situational rulership of the 4-armed Sahuagin barons. They also have a nobility, which isn't really mentioned in the core monster manual. Their home dwellings are orderly, clean, and decorated with brilliantly coloured tiles. They don't build doors, but do put up nets and bars to restrict access whilst preserving the flow of water. The architecture is almost Roman, with large areas, enclosed villas, and orderly city planning, quite unlike the flowing, curved, and somewhat chaotic structures of the merfolk and sea elves. Sahuagin don't generally tend to build very complicated structures, just domes and bowls and depressions and things like that. The original myths of the Sahuagin tell of an evil surface high elf wizard who sought to become a god, and for some reason the sea elves stood in their way, so they took sharks and from them created the Sahuagin, instilling in them a pathological hatred of the sea elves. But as the souls of Sahuagin are still those of sharks, they were the children of the shark god Sekolah, and could never be controlled by any elf. Still, there seems to be some truth to this legend, as if a population of Sahuagin live within several miles of a sea elf colony, some of the Sahuagin offspring will be born as the mutant Malenti, which look exactly like a sea elf. Perhaps some remnant of the magic that created them is the source for this bizarre occurrence, and most of the Malenti are murdered shortly after they're hatched. However, the Sahuagin are a very clever and resourceful race, and as we shall discover, they make use of those mutants to infiltrate sea elf communities, sabotaging them as best they can before the Sahuagin arrive in force to kill everyone. Skip Williams. wrote a huge volume of lore on the Sahuagin. The Sea Devils is a 96-page solid information on their culture, technology and such. This was followed by the article in Dragon Magazine number 239 in September 1997 about the Sea Devils. So you can imagine this video could be several hours long, and I have to narrow it down a lot just to fit it into a reasonable time frame, but still, this is pretty comprehensive. The Sea Devils have almost 20% more brain power than humans. On average, they have overcome many of the difficulties of an aquatic existence and constantly discover new technologies that end up being emulated by other aquatic races. They also have a telepathic bond with and cohabitate with all the different types of sharks. Their homes are shared with sharks. Their priests, always female, are always accompanied by a couple of loyal shark guards. Sahuagin protect their sensitive eyes with crystal lenses set into woven and treated masks of seaweed. They fashion complicated articulated body armour, are capable of large-scale feats of engineering. They produce a pungent-smelling jelly called Sekula's Fire, which they develop to fight against the scrags or sea trolls. This ignites in contact with water, burning with a ruddy glow, creating a seething mass of dark flame and steam that will stick to just about anything and broil it. The Sahuagin carry the stuff in thin metal tubes about twice the size of a potion bottle, and when activated creates a 30-foot long, 20-foot high and 20-foot wide cloud of the stuff that functions much like alchemical fire underwater and is treated just the same outside of the water as well, except with lesser range. They are extremely clever in the use of this stuff, setting ships on fire, for instance, to distract the crew while they simultaneously coat the underside of the hull, which will sink that ship in minutes. Sahuagin can see about 3 times further underwater than any surface race. They make use of this with ranged attacks and are smart enough to keep their distance, as they know full well what happens to them when they get the scent of blood in the water. I'll quote from a section in the Ghosts of Saltmarsh about this aspect of their nature, because it's spoiler-free. The Sahuagin are cruel and vicious in equal measure. Although they are in humanoid form, they have a mindset closer to that of a predatory shark than the outlook of human or other land dwellers. Like sharks, Sahuagin are at their most aggressive when their prey spills blood in the water. Their blood frenzy trait represents this increased ferocity. Though it can prove a significant edge in a fight, it also saddles them with a critical tactical challenge. Sahuagin affected by blood frenzy are at best reluctant to disengage from combat. Rather than withdraw in the face of defeat and find reinforcements, they might instead press the attack to their doom. As an optional rule to reflect this ferocity, a Sahuagin that comes within 30 feet of a hostile creature that doesn't have all of its hit points must use an action to make a DC 13 intelligence saving throw. On a failed save, the Sahuagin's blood frenzy takes over as normal, and the creature either stands its ground or advances to attack in melee. On a successful save, the Sahuagin retreats or escapes if possible, temporarily fighting off the influence of this trait. If the Sahuagin moves take it further than 30 feet from all hostile creatures, the situation resets, and another saving throw is called for whenever it again comes within 30 feet of an injured enemy. Of course, this represents blood in the water, so if you're a dungeon master, be aware that just being below below full hit points, doesn't necessarily mean you're bleeding into the water. So some amount of reasoning with a situation is called for. So if you're suffering from a necrotic attack or something like that, it may not necessarily have spilled blood. And be reasonable. Despite dwelling in deep ocean areas, Sahuagin are a warm water species. They reside close to geothermically active sites in the deep ocean trenches and otherwise seek to always expand their reach and dominance into warm coastal waters. The only reason they do not completely occupy all of the warm waters of the world is because they're opposed by so many other species who also prefer temperate waters to live in. It's because the Sahuagin are so clever that they've learned to exploit the deep ocean warm currents at all. Thanks to the Sea Devil's tome, I can tell you that their voice sounds breathy and toneless, as they have little control over the pitch as the air is released from a bladder over primitive vocal cords in order for them to speak the surface tongues. They use this air to speak and they gulp it down because it's from an internal flotation bladder. They don't have lungs. The 4 gills on either side of their neck absorb oxygen from the air or water. They also secrete excess salt from those vents as well. In theory, a Sahuagin could inhale an exotic gas into its flotation bladder, such as methane or helium, with no ill effect to itself because it's not actually inhaling. An adult female Sahuagin lays a single egg every 6 weeks. The egg has a vaguely rectangular shape with a tough, leathery shell. It's about the same size and thickness as 2 human fists placed together. The eggs fertilise internally and hatch after incubating for only 3 months, and Sahuagin are about 10 inches long at birth, regardless of gender. They attain full adult size in 6 to 8 weeks and eat prodigiously the entire time. The voracious hatchlings consume anything they can sink their teeth and claws into, including other hatchlings and the unhatched eggs. Unwary females tending unmerged hatchlings often suffer nips, but the hatchlings soon learn to respect their elders, and the juveniles are tightly controlled, segregated into different groups. All hatchlings undergo rigorous training in the particulars of Sahuagin language, culture, and hunting techniques from year dot. Death awaits any hatchlings who lag behind the others, and their early life is extremely competitive, brutal, and really designed to instill rigid adherence to the social order, to cull the weak from the population, and to provide a constant bolstering of the fighting force. As troops may be young and relatively uneducated, but they're fully capable combatants within a couple of months of being hatched, and are trained to follow orders right from the very start. So a Sahuagin have a tremendous edge over other races in regard to replenishing their fighting forces as quickly as possible. Everything the Sahuagin do is oriented around continual improvement, climbing the social ranks, and so on. There's no separation of church and state, military or civilian. The entire population is a militant theocracy, ruled by female priests who delegate martial action to the four-armed barons, who may be male or female, so this is the highest rank a male can achieve in their culture outside of their nobility. Eggs are gathered in groups to hatch at the same time, which means they mature in batches, known as bands. So these groups grow up in competition with each other and form the hidden strata of their own culture. And other groupings are sort of oriented around this similar sort of biological feel of bands of people working together. Their hatchling group and hatchmates are their core identity, as they don't know who their parents are. And from there, they have a slew of different orders and groups that they have rigorous and hard-won criteria for entry. They provide further goals, accomplishments, and drives for individuals, while also ensnaring them in obligations, expectations, rewards, and punishments. So your average Sahuagin would feel completely at home in the Nine Hells, no doubt thrive on the challenge and the prospect of near limitless paths of potential. They live a long time, potentially, climbing in social ranks as they grow in size. The average warrior is 6 months old to 30 years old, standing just 6 feet tall. If you see a Sahuagin over 6 feet tall, they'll be around 40 to 100 years old. Those in charge will be well over 6.5 feet tall and 80 to 150 years old, while the barons, senior priestesses, and royal guards will be hundreds of years old and growing past 7 feet tall. The royal high priestess will be from 350 to 440 years old and about 8 feet 8 inches tall, while the king will be over 9 feet tall and 600 years old. Growth slows down the older they get, but never fully stops, and their maximum size and age is unknown. The really big ones are rarely seen and closely guarded. The priestess females don't breed, as breeding females only live to a maximum of 200 years. As they grow older, their coloration darkens, which is why the barons are typically dark, because they're older than the young warriors they command. Females control Sahuagin religious life. All females in a Sahuagin community function as teachers and keepers of religious law. Females who demonstrate outstanding intelligence can become priestesses. They are the ones who create deep song, which is a form of very long-range communication that the Sahuagin can do. This, though the process is exhausting them and requires quite a bit of preparation, it also requires a priestess and one of the noble caste, or one of the barons. The Malenti mutants have greenish-silver skin, green or deep blue hair, webbed hands and feet. Malenti do not possess scales, fins or tails, so they naturally swim slower than the other Sahuagin, and their features are elven, including sparkling green eyes. Malenti have tough bodies, however resistant to blows, just as any Sahuagin, and their sensory capabilities are similar. In combat, Malenti's webbed hands and feet hide retractable claws that they can slash an opponent to ribbons with. Furthermore, Malenti possess powerful jaws that can deliver a vicious bite, which isn't apparent when you first look at them because they just look like elves. They grow at a different rate to other Sahuagin, reaching 4 feet in about 6 to 8 weeks, which is lightning fast compared to a sea elf. They grow to about 6 feet maximum and have a lifespan of only 170 years. They have an ambiguous social status, regarded as loathsome freaks by other Sahuagin who have a contempt for mutants in general. However, the Malenti are considered the property of high-ranked barons, and they cannot be killed without severe consequences due to their usefulness as espionage agents. They spend most of their time isolated in comfortable surroundings away from the general population. The exact rate of Malenti births can be as high as 1 in every 100 hatched eggs if a permanent sea elf community exists within 100 miles. For some reason, the most Tritons believe that the origin of the Sahuagin comes from drow elves, but the sea elves know that the Sahuagin race existed before the descent of the drow over 11,000 years ago. This might be because the Sahuagin Sahuagin are more matriarchal, but the Sahuagin of the outer oceans are actually patriarchal, with a noble class and a king, as mentioned. I should mention the related race called the Anguillians, which were, according to legend, the less successful experiment to create an intelligent and evil marine race. They look like large eels with limbs. The front pair are a bit like those of a crab, ending in wicked pincers. The rear are more like those of a frog. The mouth dominates the head and has rows of teeth like a lamprey. They have distorted nostrils and 2 red, malevolent eyes that are vaguely humanoid, disturbingly so, and some tendril feelers in the lower part of the jaw, much like a catfish. They don't interact with the Sahuagin much. They don't come up on land. They spend a lot of their time in the cold open waters of the deep sea, and the two races barter and trade together, with the Sahuagin getting items scavenged from the deep ocean sea wrecks, and the Aquilians trading for nets and exotic poisons. The Sahuagins hate the taste of Aquilian flesh and tolerate their cousins because they don't seek to inhabit the same environments. Aquilians are thoroughly nasty species. They know full well the horrors of the deep and serve their masters whenever they rouse from their slumbering cyclopean vaults. Encounters between the were-sharks and Sahuagin occur fairly often, as the two races inhabit warm waters. If the Sahuagin succeed in capturing a were-shark, they will keep it as a prisoner. The were-shark becomes the centerpiece of entertainment in the Sahuagin community, as the sea devils stage frequent gladiatorial combats between the were-shark and any other captives. If the were-shark can survive 2 or 3 years of this, the Sahuagin adopt it in their community. By then, the Stockholm effect is taking place, and the were-sharks believe they are a member of the community in good standing, treated as they would be any other intelligent shark, but always very wary of its potential for mayhem. A Sahuagin community with a group of were-sharks often skirmish for months, with neither side gaining much advantage. In some situations, the were-shark community and the Sahuagin leadership will agree to a loose alliance. The were-sharks receive free access to the Sahuagin's territory in return for were-shark services as guards and long-range scouts, while maintaining their independence. Sahuagin are not immune to aquatic lycanthropy, but they can never become any sort of land-based were-creature. There are cults of Sahuagin who believe the were-sharks, particularly noble Sahuagin were-shark priestesses, are sacred to the shark god Sekala, and during the full moon they set prey loose for the priestess to hunt in shark form. A lesser-known terror of the deep is called the Norwood or shark were, which is a huge shark that can take on nearly any humanoid form. They would be natural allies of the Sahuagin when you think about it. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, they are deeply chaotic and quite evil. The only interactions the Sahuagin have with them is when all of a sudden a normal-looking Sahuagin among them transforms into a massive, frenzied shark, killing and eating as many of them as it can before escaping back into the open water. Understandably, the Sahuagin take a very dim view of this kind of activity and kill the shark wares every chance they can get. Of course, in the deep ocean, the Kraken and the Aboleth also dwell, though the Aboleth actually prefer to live underground. Don't forget, the Underdark extends well past the borders of continental land and is equally accessible to oceanic races. I won't give away any of the secrets of the Saltmarsh adventures, but you can find stats for a juvenile Kraken and marine hobgoblins called the Coalinth and the cousins of the Koatoa, the Lokatha, who appear far more fish-like, dare say even a bit cute compared to previous editions. I mean, it makes sense. They're good-hearted races of fish people, so why not? So, In the Ghosts of Saltmarsh, we have a variety of new Sahuagin, from the hulking coral smashers to the dark and somewhat lanternfish-like deep divers. We see the priestesses call to their shark god Secular to provide them with the specialist mutations, and there are also some two-headed shark demons available, which raises the interesting question, what is Secular? Well, he has been called a powerful devil, but he is rightfully a lesser deity and quite capable of summoning demons, even though he spends most of his time swimming in the infernal waters of the fifth layer of the Nine Hells, Stygia, where, under the ice floes, he swims in Shyrishk, which is his own aquatic realm. I do not advise you to go there, as you will be eaten by the actual god of sharks, who exists solely to eat everything it can. Not much is known about Secular's plans, but they obviously include spreading the Sahuagin throughout the multiverse, since they are found remarkably similar to each other on many different worlds. Most surface dwellers are quite shocked when they actually do manage to speak with a captive Sahuagin, because they are an intelligent and somewhat poetic race who don't sound like savages. Most people assume that they would, though. They discover that the Sahuagin consider anywhere out of their environment, being from the surface waters down to a depth of about 2,000 feet, to be another world. When they take a trip to the outside of the water for a few hours, to them it's like being on another planet entirely, and the beings who live there are vile aliens to them. The surface is hellish, with bright light, wildly variant temperatures, dryness, constraining gravity. To them, the surface world is like a layer of the abyss or the elemental plane of fire, and they would much prefer the entire planet was once more covered in water. They firmly believe that they are a superior form of life, and it is their destiny to control everything, to bring everything into alignment with their perfect and natural order. They have a strict and stark set of axioms that they live by. Self-sufficiency and obedience are the greatest qualities. There is a place for everyone, and everyone should remain in their place, be it Sahuagin, enemy, or food, which is their three categories of living beings. The weak should perish, and the strong should lead, as only success is virtuous, and only the inadequate fail. They have no hesitation when it comes to food. Meat is meat. They eat whatever is available, including their own kind if need be. Only the living are Sahuagin, the dead are just meat. The word Sahuagin in merfolk terms means insatiable hunters or tireless ravengers. The Sahuagin call themselves we who eat, so it's not that different really. There are two correct ways to say the word. One is Sahuagin, the other is Sahuagin. Both, with the hard G at the end, both are correct. The word Malenti means changeling in Sea Elven. In their own language, the Sahuagin just call each other comrade. They call those above their station honoured one, those who are above that station more honoured one, all the way up to most honoured one. The titles we use, such as Baron and Noble, are meaningless to them. Their social structure is complicated, but makes perfect sense to them. They fight one-on-one or in small groups against each other in ritual blood challenges in order to settle disputes in their own culture, so that those who are correct are those who can back up their opinion with brute force. They have many rituals in day-to-day life, as is typical with very volatile creatures, that help them avoid conflict with each other. When two equals meet, it is customary for both to look away, as eye contact could signify that one sea devil is sizing up the other. When sea devils of unequal ranks meet, the subordinate looks at superior in the eye and then swims upward, allowing the superior to swim underneath. The subordinate then looks away while the superior watches. If this proves impractical, the subordinate stands still with its hands on its chest and eyes averted while the superior passes. If new to a place, a newcomer will announce itself and its band and where it came from, and the native of the area will then establish a proper social protocol. Before entering the structure, Sahuagin will stop and clean itself by rubbing sand on its fins, like we would wipe our feet. When they start a task, they always announce what they're going to do, and when they end the task, they announce what they have done. They do read and write, and they have a form of books, but they only ever read to record or commit something to memory. They never read aloud from a book. Also, they always announce if they are about to recite something they have read in a book, quoting its source to prove its veracity. In a society where disputes over facts can lead to getting killed and eaten, they quote their sources. If you see a massive shark jaw with treasure piled inside it, this is a sacred shrine to Secular, and to touch it means certain death. Right. Let's have a look at the standard monster listing for the Sahuagin in the core monster manual for 5th edition. First thing to note, no information on nets whatsoever. Well, the Sahuagin use nets a lot. This is a huge alteration to their combat style, so give them nets. You have every right to, according to the law for this race. Proficiency with a net allows you to add your proficiency bonus to the attack roll for any attack you make with it. A large or smaller creature hit by a net is restrained until it is freed. A net has no effect on creatures that are formless or creatures that are huge or larger. A creature can use its action to make a DC 10 strength check, freeing itself on another creature within its reach on a success. Dealing 5 slashing damage to the net, which is an armor class of 10, also frees the creature without harming it, ending the effect and destroying the net. When you use an action, bonus action, or reaction to attack with a net, you can only make one attack action regardless of the number of attacks you can normally make. The net weighs about 3 pounds, and a good quality one suitable for combat costs about 1 gold. There you go, that's nets for you, officially. Sahuagin also use poison. Just use something exactly like the poison darts that the drow use. They're identical. Okay, so medium humanoid fishy bastards. Natural armor class is 12. They can be armored up to 20 for some of the specialist variants that you find in the Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Hit points are 48 plus 4, so between 8 and 36 with an average of 22 hit points. No particular vulnerabilities or resistances. They don't have traditional sunlight sensitivity or an aversion to magic use like they used to. They have 120-foot dark vision and sharp senses with a passive perception of 15 and a +5 to perception checks. They can survive out of water for up to 4 hours, but will start to suffocate beyond that point. In the previous editions, they would become poisoned by their own metabolism, and it works out about the same. They have 120-foot range shark telepathy, and sharks are reasonably friendly with them. If you're not familiar with the giant shark, the deep water hunter shark, and the shallower water reef shark, you'd better read up on them, as the Sahuagin will always have sharks with them in combat, unless they really are up on land away from the ocean. They are more likely to be with hunter sharks than the reef sharks, and a side note, they hate dolphins and will kill them for sport. I usually say that they use a bonus action to issue one command to one shark on their turn, but it's up to you really how you work this. As mentioned, they have blood frenzy. The Sahuagin have advantage on attack rolls against any creature that doesn't have all of its hit points. This is pretty huge tactically, so it makes sense that they will attack from a distance to score those crucial opening hits before they engage with advantage in melee combat. The spear has an effective range of 20 feet and a long range of 60 feet as a thrown weapon. No reason why they wouldn't have an expendable throwing spear and a more sturdy hand spear or trident that they can use. They also attack with claws and their bite. Attributes are in general slightly above humans across the board, but not excessively so. They are strong and intelligent. They move at 30 feet per round on land and 40 feet per round in water. They make a bite attack, which is +3 to hit and does 1d4 plus 1 piercing damage, plus they can either claw for 1d4 plus 1 slashing damage or strike with a spear with one hand, doing 1d6 plus 1 piercing damage, or using both hands, supplanting their claw attack, for 1d8 plus 1 piercing damage, also +3 to hit. And at 1/2 challenge rating, they are most certainly going to be attacking in groups, at least 3 or 4 with one shark. But they can attack in bands of 20 to 30 with 5 or 6 accompanying sharks, so formidable. As mentioned, check out Ghosts of Saltmarsh for Blade Masters, Coral Smashers, Hatchling Swarms and the like. Also found in the Monster Manual is the Baron, who is large and wears a breastplate for an armor class of 16, has 9d10 plus 27 hit points for an average of 76, a faster swim speed of 50 feet per round, way higher attributes, and a ferocious strength of 19, even sharper senses and 3 attacks per round, 1 bite and 2 claw or trident attacks. The trident has the same throwing range as the spear but does an extra dice of damage, and it's also versatile, so different damage if used by 1 or 2 hands, and there's no reason for the 4-armed Baron not to use it 2-handed really. Last, there is the Priestess. She doesn't carry a weapon, her pet sharks are her weapons, and anyway, she can cast spells as a 6th level spellcaster, Cleric. Using her Wisdom of 14, her spells are DC 12 and +4 to hit. The spells listed are pretty basic Cleric loadout for boosting others in combat and healing the band of Sahuagin and the shark that she has with her, but feel free to pick and choose from the Cleric spell list for suitably sharky spells as you see fit. She'll be looking for living sacrifices to Secular and treasure to place in his shrine, and will have a holy symbol that looks like a shark fin cutting through the water. In the world of Greyhawk campaign setting, Sahuagin are known to inhabit the Azure Sea and once threatened the Kyoshi town of Saltmarsh in 570 of their reckoning. The Sahuagin laid siege to a lair of lizard folk and that adventure arc. concerns that conflict. The build-up for Sahuagin forces, it's quite an interesting tale and a really good set of adventures, and I'm quite looking forward to getting my teeth sunk into that one. In the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, one origin story explains that the Dark Elven wizard's desire to become a god resulted in them utilising experimentation to create the Sahuagin. Yes, I really do speak that fast. And that's the origin story of them on that world. It's probably not shared on Greyhawk. This was explained in The Secrets of Blood, Spirits of the Sea by Elaine Cunningham in her novel, contained in the Forgotten Realms novel The Realms of the Arcane. So if you want to read more about that, that's basically where it comes from. In Faerun, Sahuagin are known to live in the Sea of Fallen Stars in the eastern parts of the large inland sea, somewhere in the Alamba Sea, and before the Spell Plague changed the planet's geography, the Sahuagin ruled the underwater kingdom of Alexis and wreaked havoc on seafarers on the coastal towns of Unther. One final note, when speaking in Sahuagin, be sure to throw in lots of archaic language in there, with the thous and thys and these, as that is an interesting quirk of the Sahuagin, that their knowledge of the surface world is dated and reflected in the way that they speak. Please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content and all the full scripts for these videos, buy some merchandise, support your hard-working, researching sage, wear your geek with pride, check out Patron Blades for a mighty smooth shave, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.